joining us.
Sad I'm not there too, but as you can tell, I don't have much voice today, and so I think it was a smart decision to stay in Chicago and keep my terms to myself.
We appreciate that. We appreciate that. Most of us here are familiar with the fact that you grew up in Kansas, outside Lawrence. For those of you who don't necessarily know Sarah's background, give us your Kansas cred.
We moved to Kansas from upstate New York when I was 4 in 1951. I don't know if anyone in the audience is old enough to remember the terrible floods of 51, but a quarter of the state was left homeless as the Kansas River, the Kaw, flooded across the state. And I can remember coming in on the train and the water was still above the wheels up to the bottom of the carriages when we moved in. My dad had taken a job teaching at the University of Kansas, and so we grew up in and around Lawrence. When I was 10, we moved into an old farmhouse out in the country, and my brothers and I continued our education in a two-room school there, Kaw Valley District 95. It was great for us because we were fat, unathletic kids, and there were so few children in the school that everyone had to play on the sports teams, which we had never been allowed near when we lived in Lawrence. So I was a terrible athlete, but incredibly enthusiastic. We had one baseball, and when it was my turn to field, that was the end of recess, because I had a powerful arm for a 10-year-old. And the ball would often land in the cornfield, and we would spend the rest of recess looking for the ball.
You now live in Chicago, as does V.I. Warshawski. In your latest book, Pay Dirt, which there are copies out there for sale, by the way, V.I. returns to Kansas for a little R&R, which he does not get. No spoilers, but can you give us a quick overview of the plot of Pay Dirt?
V.I. has had a rough time of it in Chicago, and I won't go into the details, but she has two young women in her life who are student athletes at a Chicago area school. One's a basketball player, one's a hockey player. And they persuade V.I. that she needs some rest. She should come down to Kansas and watch the basketball player break the 3,000-point scoring mark. And we all know in the area, you're Caitlin Clark and Angel Caderos and the rest of them, but that's small change now. But when I was writing the book, it was a big deal. So V.I. goes down, but one of the girls, young women on the trip, goes missing, and the others have to get back to Chicago. They beg her to stay and look for their missing friend. V.I. finds her in an abandoned drug house out in rural Douglas County, and her troubles really begin in earnest then. She's a convenient fall person for the local cops because she's an outsider. It turns out there are some billionaires in Kansas who are doing naughty things, and V.I. runs afoul of them, and so she has all these forces, law, money, and so on, stacked up against her. But she also has some good friends. It's in particular, one of my favorite characters, new characters in this series, is an enthusiastic young journalist who is working for my fictitious Douglas County Chronicle. And Zoe, her name is, and V.I. together thwart the forces of evil, and good to a certain extent triumphs. And in my books, good can't triumph completely because looking at how you bring extremely powerful evildoers to justice these days is an uphill battle. But at least V.I. gets to go home and rejoin her beloved dogs.
You created V.I. back in 1982. It took you until 2017 to bring her to Kansas. So Pay Dirt is not the first time that V.I. has come to Kansas. It took you a long time to bring her here, but not very long to bring her back.
That's right.
What is it about bringing her to Kansas that you felt
I don't know if it's connected to age. I hate to confess that I am getting older day by day. 80 is closer than 70, which is a shocking bump. But my dad died in a rather sad way with dementia. And when I would come back to visit him, the facility where we unfortunately had to have him committed was right on the edge of the prairie. And as a child, I don't think I really appreciated the beauty of the prairie. But after sitting with him and singing to him and so on, I would get relief by walking out on the prairie there. And I'd lie in the grass and I would just lie still, and all of the prairie insects would come and rest on me. And I think that it was both incredibly beautiful, peaceful, and nourishing, nurturing. And so it made Kansas feel like a place that I needed to be for refuge, maybe Chicago for crime and adventure, but Kansas for refuge. And then over time, it began to be a place that I actually wanted to write about. And so I made it the setting for several books. 3 of the VI novels take place partly in the Lawrence, Eudora area. One of them, Deadland, there, forgive me, I have a good friend, a photographer who's another Kamsan in exile in Chicago, Terry Evans, and she's photographed the country around Salina extensively, and she introduced me to, and now I'm sorry, I'm trying to blank on the name of the canyon, but there's a beautiful canyon that looks like a miniature Grand Canyon in the Salina area. So my brother who still lives in Lawrence and I went hiking there, and that became part of the setting, a major part of the setting for my novel Deadland.
Sara, it strikes me that by bringing VI to Kansas, or really anywhere out of Chicago, that you're stripping her bare, that she's away from home, she's away from her friends, she's away from her dog, she's away from all of her contacts in Chicago, and she's really forced to rely on just herself. Is that something that you deliberately wanted to sort of strip her bare?
I think my husband, who was my most important supporter and advocate for the nearly 50 years of our life together, died in 2018. And grappling with that loneliness has been a challenge in many ways. And I think that I felt that if I put VI into that similar kind of situation, that it might help me figure out how to move through that particular kind of loneliness. And you know, it's a loneliness that I'm sure many people in this audience have experienced themselves, because you may have friends, and I have wonderful friends who are great supports in my life, but there's a particular kind of loneliness when there isn't someone who cares what you did during the day, or you're going out at night, or you're leaving town. And every time I leave town now, and know that there's nobody here keeping track of where I am and what I'm doing, it's painful. And so I don't know that VI has solved that problem for me, but she certainly made me more aware of really what the components of it are.
You've taken considerable liberties with the geography of Lawrence and Kansas. Can you talk about VI's Kansas versus, say, our
I created a second major hill north of Lawrence, and you know the caw just winds around in this way that's I don't see how anyone could ever navigate that river, but north of Lawrence, in one of the bends of the river, I've created another hill, and it's the focus of all the action in the book. I didn't want to deal with real geography because the story I'm telling is one that's quite painful historically, personally, and it's my story to tell. I didn't want to lay it on the town of Lawrence or on Douglas County for that matter. Another liberty I took was, which was very deliberate, was that the crimes in the book are committed in rural Douglas County, which means that really they should be under the direction of the sheriff to solve. But I have a cast of characters in the Lawrence Police Department that I created back when VI first came to Kansas. I like those characters, particularly a sergeant who, you know, there's a certain romantic tension between them, even though it goes by the way of Pager. And I thought, if I add the sheriff's police deputies to this as well, this book is going to be longer than War and Peace. So I completely cut out the sheriff's department, for which I apologize, but maybe they're happy. Maybe they're happy not to have me messing around with them.
My favorite liberty that you took with Lawrence is the name of VI's favorite coffee shop. Tell us about
yes,
the Decadent Hippo.
So yes, I've heard from people from Lawrence who know that this is actually the bourgeois pig, and I'm just going to chastise the bourgeois pig right here on the air in front of everyone, because they no longer open early in the morning. They make the best espresso that I've ever drunk anywhere, but I need it in the morning. I don't need it at midnight. So, come on guys, start opening at 7 a.m. again. The Decadent Hippo, I will hasten to add, means all of VI's and my need for caffeine around the clock. And here I am, sick in Chicago, sore throat, really fatigued. They tell you plenty of fluids, no caffeine, but I would not be sitting here today if I had not had my espresso.
And it's in a pretty big mug, so you must be drinking a lot of it.
I switched to herbal tea, what okay.
Sarah, when you first created VI 40 years ago, did you have any kind of sense of where you might take her through the decades, or what kind of trajectory you saw in your wildest dreams for her?
When I created her, I did not imagine more than one book. It was I did not have a lot of confidence in my ability to write a whole novel, to tell a whole story. I probably would never have started writing about her if second wave feminism hadn't given me the nudge to look at the way that women were treated traditionally in crime fiction, which has always been my favorite form of reading. But women might be vamps or victims. If they had a sex life, they were wicked. If they didn't have a sex life, they were morally good, but they really couldn't tie their shoes without adult supervision. They were so inept. And I wanted a woman who was like me and my friends, who was doing the kind of work that maybe had been a closed door to us growing up and in high school, but was just opening up in the late 70s and early 80s. But we had to solve our own problems. We did not have Prince Charmings who came along and solved them. We had to make do on salaries that were 50% of what men were earning. We had to look after children and homes and do all these things. And if we had a sex life, that was just part of life. That didn't have anything to do with our moral character. So it took me 8 years from imagining having a detective who did that until I actually had a vision of what she really should be, what she should be like. And I struggled and wrote that book, Indemnity Only. And then I thought, I'm done. I have fixed the problem of the way women are treated in crime fiction, and now I will go back to selling computers to insurance agents, which was what I was doing before, well, doing while I was writing the first book. So I hadn't planned on a series, and then the series just kind of came because the publisher wanted a second book, and they wanted a third book, and then suddenly now there are 22 books in the series. So I don't think I planned, I know I never sat down and thought, this is what she should be like in 50 years or 40, I guess it's been. I wanted her, she was a person who was very grounded in history. Her mother was a refugee from Mussolini's Italy. Her father's parents worked in the Chicago stockyards on what they call the killing floors for $11 a week. And so growing up as the offspring of blue-collar immigrants, refugees, had a particular impact on her personality and life story. As time has passed, those events are so far in the past now that they don't resonate with modern readers. And yet I have not wanted to age Vi. When we started, we were both 30, and I'm 77 now, and she's 50, which just is more proof of how much better she is than me, stronger. So it's been a struggle, really, I don't know how to, I guess I'm not really answering the question, but she doesn't have a trajectory as much as she has a mission, I would say. And her mission is always to fairness and justice, and especially for ordinary people whose lives are upended and don't have a powerful patron to look after them. That's her role. And as America has become more and more, I mean, I know we talk about being divided, but I think what troubles me is how much money matters more than it did when I started out. And the number of incredibly wealthy people who now can control various aspects of our society that ought to be controlled by our elected representatives. It's harder and harder for ordinary people to fight medical bills or rental hikes or all those kinds of things. In my neighborhood in Chicago, the Obama Center is being built in my neighborhood, and this is seen as a tremendous opportunity for real estate companies. So they're moving in, they're buying up old apartment buildings, and people who've lived there for 30, 40, 50 years are being evicted because the realtors want to tear these buildings down and put up high-end condos. And so this is the kind of thing where money matters more than anything. And sorry, I'm ranting, but through VI, I'm struggling with ways that you can combat this and keep your dignity and keep some sense of justice for ordinary people. Sorry to go off on that tangent.
That's all right, that's what we're here for. Has your relationship with VI changed over the years? Do you think about her differently than you did, say, 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
I think that when I first started with her, we were very separate beings. And also, gosh, I mean, when I started with her, 30 didn't feel young, but it is very young. And so I was much more carefree and insouciant, and so she was as well. For me, it's a struggle with a first-person narrative to have distance between who I am and who she is. So occasionally I take a break from her, which in fact I'm doing right now. I've created a new character. And VI is recovering from painter, and I think VI is in a spa in Sardinia, just drinking lovely red Sardinian wine and fresh goat cheese from whoever she's renting a place from has a flock of goats. While I'm struggling with my new book and I'm sick, and I'm like, why can't I be in Sardinia? And to go back to your question, I guess it's because in some ways we've gotten too enmeshed in my head, and I'm not thinking of her as a separate character enough anymore. So, you know, she does amazing things that I could never do, and if I was doing them, I wouldn't be writing about them. I'd be out there doing them. But emotionally, psychically, we've gotten too enmeshed, which is why really I'm taking a break from her. Give her some distance. Let her be her own person, and then when I come back to her, it'll look clearer. Maybe not.
Sara, I've interviewed many authors over the years, and one thing that I hear over and over again is that their characters surprise them in terms of how they act, the situations they find themselves in. Does VI still surprise you?
Oh, absolutely. I think that when I started writing Pater, as I said earlier, it was a lot of what I went through there was in reaction to my own emotions, but I was, Bianca is usually, even if she's brash and an activist, she's usually pretty empathic, and the first couple of chapters of Pater, which set in motion why she goes to Kansas and the interactions she's having, the harshness that she was exhibiting towards her young friends, when I came back and read it cold, it was way more than I was comfortable with. And I had to dial it back because I think it would have been as shocking to readers as it was to me. But that, I don't know where that came from. Because I just don't know where it came from.
Pater, like all the VI stories, is essentially a crime story, and the mystery of solving that crime. But like all your books, it's not just about a crime, it's about bigger subjects like corporate greed and poverty and social injustice. For you, does the crime come first, or does the broader issue that you want to talk about, does that come first? And then you find a crime that sort of works with that.
It differs from book to book. One of my early books that I'm proudest of is called Bloodshot, and I worked for many years in the insurance, well, a decade, which doesn't seem long anymore, but it was a lot then in the insurance industry. And one of the big questions that came up at the time that I was working there was the fact that asbestos miners, in particular the Johns Manville Company, had known for decades that before the information was public knowledge that asbestos caused terrible lung illnesses, and they had suppressed this. And then the insurance end was, as these claims came in, how were the underwriters ever going to afford to pay the claims? And Congress stepped in and saved the insurance industry more than maybe the people suffering from asbestosis. But I used that crime seemed so shocking to me, but I couldn't write about a real company, and so I changed it to a chemical company, and I made up a damaging chemical, which which I guess isn't very hard to do. Now we're finding out that it's easy to invent a really dangerous chemical. But so in that case, it was the crime that definitely came first, and it took me months to come up with characters who could tell that story. And then I love those characters. I loved writing about them so much, and it told me that it's one thing to have a crime, but you have to have people telling the story. So until I have people that come to life for me, the story is dead. It's all about people and how they speak and interact.
Speaking of people, you've already mentioned one of the characters in Pay Dirt is a local reporter for the Douglas County, fictitious Douglas County newspaper. And she and VI form, I guess you'd call it kind of an uneasy alliance. Was there something you wanted to say about the role of newspapers in journalism?
Funny you should ask that. Was I that subtle?
Well, I am a journalist, so.
I think the biggest danger that our republic faces is the loss of reliable news, and news that everyone, regardless of their political belief, can and will look at and come away with some semblance of a believable story. And the depth of investigative reporting over the last 3 decades has just demoralized me. When big companies in the late 1990s started buying up newspapers, television stations, and so on, the first thing they did was to fire half of their reporting staff. And every time they would cut the staff in half, the stock price would double. And so there was a big incentive to keep getting rid of reporters. And so now it's really hard to find reliable news. And yet, people like you, Kate, and friends of mine, they keep going into journalism because they have a passion for news. So I loved creating young Zoe. She gets $12,000 a year from the Douglas County Chronicle for covering everything that happens in Douglas County, from fires and weddings to chemical spills and to the detective from Chicago coming to town. This is going to be her big break. She's going to become a national figure, and who knows what she'll do next. But she's driven by this passion for the news that I think still drives journalists. It's harder for them to find places to report it, I guess. So I subscribe. I have paid subscriptions to 8 different news media, and because I don't read them all every day. Some of them I never read, except when there's a particular story I want to follow. But I just believe so strongly in paid quality journalism that I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is. Anyway, I have a storyline about Zoe. I hope I live long enough. I write so slowly. I need to write faster, smarter, harder. Because I have a story about Zoe that I really want to tell when I finish the book I'm writing now, which is about Lily, a 75-year-old former CIA agent who's on the run from the CIA. So when I finish with Lily, then maybe I'll go to Zoe. I don't know. We'll see.
The Lawrence Public Library figures prominently in Pay Dirt, and there's even a shout out to Kathleen Morgan, who happens to be the chair of the Kansas Book Festival Foundation. Sarah, you're surrounded today virtually by librarians, book lovers, readers. Can you talk about the role of libraries in your life, and maybe in particular in the role that they played in Pay Dirt?
Well, first of all, I am so proud of my hometown, the way that Lawrence supports its library. In the depth of the economic turndown in 2008-9, Lawrence voted overwhelmingly to fund a huge new addition to the library. all kinds of amenities in the library. And it's like, I was in awe. I don't know any place else in the country. I hope there are other places, but I don't know them that put that kind of support into their library. And in pay dirt, when I was a child growing up, the reference librarian was a woman named Mrs. Osmo. My brothers and I were terrified of her. She just seemed incredibly stern and forbidding of my mother, because she had a very warm and cordial relationship. But the rare books room at the Lawrence Library is named for her. And VI spends a lot of her time in the library using their free computers, which is one of the many things that libraries all over America offer anyone who walks in, even if they don't live there. But she also hides some vital documents in the Osmo room. And I asked Kathleen Morgan where she should hide them, and we had a contest, or she and the library director had a contest for best idea. I can't remember what the prize was. I hope there was a prize. Anyway, the winner had to be the Osmo. When someone suggested that, I said, oh yeah, that's right.
One of the things that I love about VI is how human she is. She has aches and pains. She second guesses herself all the time. She's constantly running through scenarios. I should have done this, or I should have done that instead. How do you balance writing a character who is really human with one that is very, very competent at her job?
I think more of us are like that than, it's the surface versus the interior. It's one of the things that fascinates me as a person and as a writer. Years ago, I published a collection of short stories called Windy City Blues, and one of the stories in it is told in the third person. Lottie, whose family were destroyed in the Shoah, in the Holocaust, her grandparents were wealthy, and in addition to losing their lives, there were a lot of artifacts that went missing. And the story is about one of these artifacts, a little statue that shows up so unexpectedly in Chicago. And Lottie is anguished, bitter, and VI steps in to deal with this and to get the statue back for her. And in Lottie's eyes, VI in this story, although most of the time Lottie is a mentor, they're very close, but in this story, Lottie is looking at her as someone who is unnaturally cheerful and competent and not understanding the trauma that she's going through. So I wanted to show that to an outsider, someone who's not in VI's head, and I mean Lottie's not an outsider, but she's outside her head. It's very different than being inside. If I had told the story from VI's point of view, she would have been just distraught about what Lottie was going through and doing everything she could to fix it. But you don't see that. All you see is the outside.
If you've read a number of VI books, you know that opera is a theme that is carried throughout. It's important to VI, it's important to her relationship with her mother, Gabriella. And I have to admit, I've never given it much thought until I went back and read Ghost Country, one of your earlier books. And there's a character in that book that is a washed-up opera singer. And it got me really thinking, what is the role of opera in your life? And what is it that brings to VI?
My life is about voice, who gets to speak and who gets listened to. And I love opera without being terribly knowledgeable about it, but I love that the way that the human voice works in opera. Opera is, if you start second applause, it's like, this is so ludicrous, but also that gives me courage, because sometimes my plots seem incredibly ludicrous to me, and I think, well, if Mozart could get away with it, I can get away with it. It's the act of voice and being able to project emotions through your instrument that just seems to me to be like the biggest metaphor for the things that I care about most passionately. And for VI in particular, her mother had hoped to have a career as an opera singer. Again, going back to the fact that this series is now 40 years old, but that her career was derailed by the war, and she was a Jew, and Mussolini's race laws meant that she could not study, perform, or do any of those things, and she fled in the dark of night. I wrote Ghost Country. There were many things that went through my head writing Ghost Country, but as I wanted to have an opera composer in it, I couldn't make it happen. I wrote 250 pages of that novel about a would-be composer and a would-be opera, and then it wasn't working, and I had to turn my back on it and change the story. But in the process of that 250 pages, I went to Virginia to spend time with Thea Musgrave, who was the opera composer in residence for the Virginia Opera. And, to me, music is kind of like, it comes directly from some, like, heaven or something like that, through the composer's mind, down onto the page. It's possible that was true for Mozart, but as I've learned, not for anyone else, not even really equally great, wonderful composers. But I asked Ms. Musgrave, I said, so do you hear it in your head and then you just put it on paper? God, I was naive and stupid. And she said, I start every day with the fear of the blank page. And her blank page has musical bars on it. And I was like, oh, well, that is really disappointing. Music as this kind of amazing, just external thing that comes to you instead of something you have to wrestle with the way a writer has to wrestle with a sentence.
That is quite a metaphor for writing in general. You're also faced with the blank page. It doesn't just come from on high. You have to work at that craft.
That's right. And some days I think, well, Shakespeare, he already used all the good lines, and the rest of us are just trying to catch up and think of new ways to say what he already said better. And maybe it did come to him like that, I don't know. We'll never know. But Bird by Bird, Annie Lamott, she has this advice for you when you're stuck as a writer. And she has a sheet of paper, and she cuts into it a space just big enough for one line of type on your computer screen. And she puts that over her computer, and she fills it with something. And then she takes the paper away, there's something on the screen, and then she can start writing. And I have often used that advice. I think it's such great advice.
It's just getting started. You said that writing Pay Dirt was the hardest work you've ever done. Why was that?
I feel like, in a way, I'm being so much more personal in this conversation than I might be if I were there in person. And so I'll just continue about in that vein. And, it's because I can't really see people's faces, so I don't know if you're how much I needed to tell that story of I wasn't writing about lynchings. I don't write about graphic violence. I don't write about rape. And although people get killed, I don't describe murders. But I needed to write about the way in which people of color, including indigenous people, were deprived of their land as well as their lives. And I certainly could have said that book in Chicago because Chicago has just as much blood on its hand, maybe more, because we do so many shady property deals here. But because of the size of the city and the way the size makes it hard to trace what's happening to property here, it seemed to me to be easier to tell it in a smaller community. And the Lawrence is not small. It was 25,000 when we moved there, and it's 100,000 now. But it's still easier to follow a single thread of a story there than it is in Chicago. And so that, but just struggling with it and struggling with the emotions of, it would be like finding it to me. This history to me is so personal because Kansas is so in my bones, even though I've lived away from it for my entire adult life, but it's the land of my childhood and of my young adulthood. It was like finding that my father had committed some terrible crime. It was that painful to me. So it was hard to write about it.
I have lots more questions about VI and writing in general, but I want to switch gears a little bit. Could you tell us about your work with the Sara and Two Sea Dogs Foundation?
I set up this foundation 20 years ago, roughly 22 years ago, I can't remember now exactly. But I wanted to do some intentional philanthropy instead of just randomly responding to requests for money. And I wanted it to be directed to women and to children of both genders who could get help through several things, through the arts, sports, science. And I wasn't finding, sorry, I'm not talking about this very organizedly. There are a couple of foundations that offered to have a donor-advised fund for me, but the way that they directed money was much more political than what I wanted. For instance, through the Chicago Foundation for Women, the programs that they supported, which worked with the arts, were more with arts as a means to an end instead of arts as a way for self-expression. So I have a wonderful advisor who had been with the MacArthur Foundation and then decided that small money could do more good than big money and stepped down and started advising people like me with small amounts of money to give. And we were set up primarily to support, as I say, these arts programs, but we also have a strong component for reproductive health care. And so, unfortunately, because of the way reproductive health care has been removed from access to many women around the country, most of what the foundation supports right now is reproductive health. But we still have, there's a program that I love called, well, it's Project Exploration run through the University of Chicago. They have two children's programs, and one is Brothers for Biology and Sisters for Science. And these programs have done an extraordinary kind of outreach in the Chicago public schools to helping children who don't often have access to science education. They get to pick experiments to run, they design them, and with help from skilled researchers, they execute them. And now the first cohort have gone through primary school and high school, just taking part in this after-school program. A lot of them have been accepted in universities not through affirmative action, but just based on their ACT scores. So we're just incredibly proud, my board and I, about being able to support that kind of success.
I'm going to turn it over to our audience for questions in just a minute, so get thinking about what you'd like to ask Sarah. But one last question for you. What should I have asked you today? What question do you wish I'd asked you?
I think you have covered the ground pretty well. I don't know. I don't know. You know, do I ever think about moving back to Kansas? Every time I come to visit, and it takes me. I'm 26 miles from O'Hare Airport, and it takes me longer to get from Kansas City Airport to Lawrence than it does to get from my house to O'Hare. So that's when I really think about moving back. But I have to say, my adult life is really locked in Chicago. And much as I love Kansas, I don't know that I will ever move back.
Well, Kansas loves you, and we are really glad that you joined us today, even if it had to be remotely. I am going to take some questions from the audience. Because of the Zoom setup, I will need to repeat those questions to Sara so that she can hear them. So keep your questions really short so I can relay it to her. So any questions from the audience? Don't be shy. Yes?
So real quick, Kate. Sarah, can you hear me on your end?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a roving microphone, so I'll actually go around to those that have a question, and I'll let them ask it directly into the mic. So.
First question from Drew, the pickleball over.
Hi, I really enjoyed reading your book. I have to admit, my first exposure to V.I. Warshawski was the 90s movie with Kathleen Turner. And I enjoyed that movie too, but from Paint to Dirt, you really didn't describe, details so much about the character, but I know she's in her 50s. What do you think of the casting of Kathleen Turner? And if you redid a movie today, who would you pick as the actor?
Oh gosh, I should have been ready for that one. There are some young-ish 40-something actors who I think would do a great job, and I don't, their names aren't coming to me, but one series that I recently watched called Diplomat. Does anybody know that? I love the woman who played the American ambassador to England in that series. But
Please carry something. I can't remember.
anyway, I think she would make a great VI. She's got attitude, and Kathleen was very committed to the role, and that was why Disney made the movie. But they couldn't decide whether they wanted it. The movie was kind of a mess, in my opinion, and the box office agreed. They couldn't decide whether Kathleen was still body heat or whether she was V.I. Warshawski. So the one scene there were two scenes that made me really angry. One was where she does a kind of striptease in the back of a taxi cab, and I'm like, no, take that out. And of course, I had no say in anything that went on in it. And the other was they made Mr. Contreras, they turned him from being her neighbor into the worst kind of stereotype of a Mexican immigrant. And it just made me really angry, but as I say, they did not care anything about what I had to say. So, in a way, I was glad that it was a box office bomb, because as they were making it, I just felt I lost control of my voice and my character's voice, and I stopped writing. Then when the movie came out and I saw it, and I was like, oh, this has nothing to do with anything I ever thought of. And so I went back and finished what was then my 8th novel, I guess, 7th novel. So in a way, I was glad that they made a mess of it. Disney has sat on the rights ever since. They have not wanted to make a movie themselves, but they haven't wanted to let anyone else do it. So we're constantly trying different kinds of, my agent, and I are constantly trying different ways to work out a project that Disney would be willing to take part of, and that we could go back and maybe get someone like the diplomat Carrie to play a strong and more believable role. And a real Mr. Contreras, one of the things that I like, oh, you have more questions? I'll shut up.
Do we have any other questions from the audience?
That was Carrie Russell. That's her name, Carrie Russell.
Carrie Russell was the name.
Oh, thank you.
Other questions? Oh, someone from Shirley, from the Lawrence Public Library.
I just love you.
Thank you.
I'm happy to listen to you ramble on. The question I had was to hear more about Lily and this next book.
Sure, if other people are interested. So, I had a friend who turned 70 last year, and his dream birthday was to be in Paris on Pride Day. And so, a bunch of us flew over to be in Paris on Pride Day. And it was hard to find a hotel room, never mind all those details. The hotel room that I found, the bed was like 6 feet off the ground. And I got out one morning and I slipped and fell, and fortunately not a major injury, but I was thinking, gosh, what if VI was really 70-something and slipped and fell and hurt her hip, and then she's hobbling around. And then I thought, okay, that could be someone. And so in that moment, Lily, the CIA agent, came to me. And I'm in the middle of writing about her. It's a slow process, as all my writing is, but because it's very different from writing about VI, and having to think about how a CIA agent would behave and so on. So VI, Lily is retired. Somebody writes an expose of the country where I made up the country to make my life easier. It's called Ayalistan, which is Turkish for imaginary country. So Ayalistan is right next to Kazakhstan. And that's where Ayalistan is where Lily served. And now some journalist for the New Yorker is writing one of the New Yorkers in-depth, endless articles, the letter from Ayalistan. And they talk to people there, blame Lily and the CIA for all the things that are going wrong with the country. And Lily's like, no, I never did that. And then she starts going back and finding out that, well, yes, she did inadvertently do many things that she wished she had known more about at the time. And so she starts writing about it, and the CIA is cranky, and they can't get her to shut up, so then they decide to kill her. And so she's on the run, and my challenge with this book is, if the CIA is after you, how do you keep them from killing you? How do you live to fight another day? But the other thing is, I was having a lot of trouble with it, and then I thought, really, the CIA seems like this almost mythic, outsized organization that knows when we've been sleeping, knows when we're awake. But really, it is just a big bureaucracy, like the insurance company I used to work for, and like all the big bureaucracies I've ever encountered, government, corporate, whatever. People are insecure, they want to be close to the source of power, they know other people out of the way, and so really I don't need to know a lot about the CIA to write about this. I just need to think about how people like to react in bureaucracies. Anyways, some of it is just really, I'm just doing stuff for fun. Like the big epic of Ayalistan is about the eagle and the hunter. And the hunter who falls under the spell of an eagle, who's probably a magical creature. And in the Hayali mythology, when the country is in danger, the hunter and the eagle will emerge and come down from the highest mountain, Mount Caucasus, 19,000 feet high, and save the country. So it's just fun to write the epic, even though I may not ever have it in a finished book. It may just be on my website. So I'm just having fun playing with it and inventing it and creating Lily. And Yeah, so that's the story so far.
Do you know a working title?
The working title is Bad Company, since this the general slang word, not slang, but word for the CIA is the company. I hope to get a better title because I have a very beloved friend in England, Liza Cody, who wrote 6 of the best women PI novels that I think were ever written through her character Anna Lee. And one of those is called Bad Company, and I don't want to use Liza's title if I can avoid it.
I think
Although her company wasn't the CIA, it was something else.
I think we probably have time for one more short question. Do we have another question from the audience? All right. Oh, there's one up front.
Are you going to continue aging VI?
Are you going to continue aging VI? Did I get that right?
Yeah, is she going to reach that?
Is she going to reach 70s?
When I'm 100, if I'm still mentally fit, writing and hang back alive, 70 will start looking really young to me. I just read the poet Sappho, Greek poet Sappho, who died 2,700 years ago. Someone just discovered a new poem by her in which she's writing about old age, and she says, I used to dance with legs like little fawns dancing around. And I thought, okay, when I'm 100, 70 will look like someone who can still dance